Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to 52 Living Ideas. Shrikant will be joining us a little later this evening. So I will just jump in and get us started for today. So one moment. Okay. So today's the last of the last week of the MBSR series. And the focus tonight will really be around deepening your practice and a little bit of gratitude. If for those of us who watch the videos, a lot of the videos surrounded a gratitude practice and the benefits of that. So I think too, one thing that's been a major theme for the group, I think, over the last 8 weeks has really been to find something that works for us. And what that is going to be different for every person. How often we do it will vary as well. And yeah, and then I guess a little more on that further is that Robert Wright, he's an author and a journalist, and he's written and studied a lot about different religions, and he's done some work or some studying in Buddhism. And I think that he does a really good job of mapping this out, kind of like what it looks like based on, or what it could look like based on our different interest and personalities and kind of like our natural kind of like inclinations, I guess. And so what he says is in like Tibetan Buddhism, the practice revolves around a lot around visualizing. So he says that practice might really resonate with visual artists. And then similarly, Zen has a lot to do with meditating on a koan, which is kind of like it's like a puzzle type poem that one would kind of meditate on like the meaning of and discuss it with other people. So then maybe someone who's like a writer or a poet would be more interested in that. And then the last kind of comparison he makes is the Vipassana, which is the practice it's the technique that I practice. And Vipassana is a lot about the body and the sensations of the body and the mind. So he says that perhaps like psychologists would be interested in that. So you have like all these different kind of approaches to Buddhism, to meditation, and to mindfulness that can be successful that would work for different people. And one thing I wanted to note too is the different ways and kind of the different ways we can define mindfulness. So Jon Kabat-Zinn, he's someone who he actually was the founder of the MBSR program that we just went through. And he defines mindfulness as paying attention to something on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. So those are kind of like the three must-haves, according to him, for like, am I being mindful right now? You're choosing what you're paying attention to. You're doing it right now, and you're doing it in a way that you're not judging your experience or what's happening. And then I also wanted to read something out of Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. And one thing that Carl Jung talks a lot about too is that also parallels mindfulness is the process of individuation. And both of the techniques, or both of the ideas, talk a lot about bringing our unconscious and making that conscious and becoming aware of that. So I just wanted to read a excerpt from Man and His Symbols that I think really, it almost like defines mindfulness, but what he's talking about here is the process of individuation and bringing the making the unconscious conscious. And I guess just a little bit more background. I'm not going to talk about Carl Jung this whole time, but just for people who maybe aren't familiar with the term individuation, a really simple way that it was described to me once that that really resonated with me and that I remembered was that the process of individuation is realizing what you are supposed to be in any moment. So it's kind of like how you're supposed to act, what you should do in any moment. So he says here, one is seeking something that is impossible to find or about which nothing is known. In such moments, all well-meant, sensible advice is completely useless. Advice that urges one to try to be responsible, to take a holiday, not to work so hard or to work harder, to have more or less human contact, or to take up a hobby. None of that helps, or at best only rarely. And then he says, there is only one thing that seems to work, and that is to turn directly toward the approaching darkness without prejudice and totally naively, and to try to find out what its secret aim is and what it wants from you. So especially that last line where he says we should turn into that darkness and look at it totally naively. I think that him saying like we should look at it totally naively is what we're also trying to do in mindfulness meditation, which is to look at something non-judgmentally and not bring in these preconceived notions about what we should be experiencing and what that should look like. And so on Sunday, I was in the car driving. I've been upstate since the pandemic happened, and I went back to New York. That's where I'm from, New York City, for the week. And I was in the car with my partner, and we were talking about meditation and kind of like what that looks like to different people. And one thing that really came out of that conversation was kind of like, what's the difference between meditating and observing the self in other ways? And so then I got to think about kind of like, so what am I actually doing when I'm meditating? And so just to give you some background, my partner's name is Gabriel, and he's very rational, logical, very like systematic in his thoughts, very opposite from me actually. And I myself, for those of us who are familiar with maybe the 8 cognitive functions of Carl Jung, I am definitely dominant introverted intuition, NI. And introverted intuition it's a lot about processing kind of in the background of your experience and using kind of like your intuition. And I'll get kind of how I interpret my intuition as the sensations of my body and kind of how I go about interpreting that. So when Gabriel, and I guess in looking at these 2 different ways of approaching meditation or mindfulness, what really came out of it too is that it's 2 different ways to like quantify the self. So people are quantifying the self with Fitbits and Apple Watches and things like that. John, as part of 52 Living Ideas on Fridays, does a series on self-help, and he talks not every week, but a lot of the time he's talking about like ways to kind of document and record our lives so we can kind of like reference and look back at these experiences we're having. So when Gabriel kind of is going through the world, he's quantifying situations or what he should do in terms of numbers, probability, modeling. So it's like something will happen and it's if I do X, what is the probability that I will get the response that I want? If I do X, what are all the various things that could happen? And looking at who is he as a person, what is his model of himself, how is he kind of viewing this other person or modeling this other person, and how do those things work together? And so he's kind of making decisions based on that very kind of like rational, systematic thinking logic. Whereas what really I'm doing with my meditation practice in how I am quantifying the self in my meditation in terms of body sensation. So it's very different. You know, Gabriel's very like in the brain, thinking about things very like consciously. And what I'm doing in my meditation in paying attention to the sensations is the process that I kind of have thought about is, number one, it's observation, which we've talked about a lot in this course. So sensations arrive and observing them. Then number two is measuring them. So none of this too is a conscious act. It's kind of the mindfulness or the benefit comes from just observing. So in measuring, it's kind of like you meditate over a longer period of time, and now you have more data or more material to kind of like work with for yourself. And then three is categorizing. So now I'm dropping, you know, I have all these different kinds of sensations. I've experienced them over a long period of time. So now I'm dropping them into buckets because I had this prolonged experience. So now I have some repeated understanding of what my sensations really are. And then the fourth step, I guess, in the way that I quantify myself through the meditation is in my response and how I am responding. So I collect all this information from my sensations, and then based on that repeated experience, as sensations arise in my body, what I'm then doing is, because I've already measured and cataloged them, then I can be like, okay, I know how to respond to this. I have been here before. So I have this kind of like record, and I have something to like look back to. And then, so then when I get to respond, and then again, what I've done is kind of, so I have these sensations, I'm familiar with them, and then now I need to respond to them, because mindfulness in the practice isn't about just becoming a vegetable and now I'm mindful so anyone can kind of come and hurt me. Meditation actually makes you like very active. So the first like bucket is do nothing. You know, I experienced something, I've experienced it before, and I decide I should do nothing. And an example of that would be if someone cuts you off on the road or in the grocery store, kind of these like very minor injuries that we're programmed to kind of lash out to, and that may hurt our ego, but that ultimately it doesn't really matter. We're not going to see this person again. We're not going to affect the situation in any way. And then the next way to respond is, and these titles aren't great, they're working titles, but the next one is to respond skillfully, which really is, it could be interpreted as similar to do nothing because you're also responding skillfully. But in respond skillfully, I'm categorizing that as you're taking an action, you're not doing nothing. And so maybe, but what you're doing is, or what I'm doing actually when I experience this is, it often comes up for me when I'm being critiqued in some way. So it's like I'm being critiqued, it's uncomfortable, I'm feeling all of these things in my body, but then I'm able to kind of like jump back into like my brain and into like my intellect and be like, okay, let me think about this and not respond in the way that my body is like telling me to respond, which isn't always like in line with what I should be doing in that situation. And then the next bucket is to take strong action. So I also bring this up because so to take strong action is if you are experiencing abuse of another person, or something that you believe is like morally wrong. What it is like you're taking strong action in that situation to make things right. And so one thing too that I've come to realize, like when people ask me, you know, what have you kind of like, what's the biggest kind of like thing you realize or that has like happened with my meditation practice? And I'll explain how I kind of define these terms, but what it breaks down to for me is that I've become more accepting and less tolerant. So it's very similar to the dichotomy of control or the serenity prayer. And I put the do nothing category in really is the same thing as accepting. It's kind of like this thing has happened. You don't have any control over it. It's kind of like, why bother putting your energy into it? I'm just going to accept it and move on. And then the less tolerant, I really attach to the take strong action category, because what's happened is because I've spent so many years observing my sensations that I have like a more subtle understanding of the ways I am affected by things and the reality of that. And I have become less tolerant of it because it's uncomfortable, and I don't want to sit with that. So it makes you kind of like very active and not blindly reactive in that way. And one other thing that I wanted to say about this idea of do nothing is that I heard it was like a poem, a Buddhist poem. I don't want to say it was a koan because I'm not sure if it was, but it said, it was something about how when you have the ability to do nothing, you can actually do anything. Because most of the time we're very reactive, and we're not even thinking about what we're doing. But when we actually have the ability to choose to do nothing is when we can actually do anything. So with that, I will end there. And actually, I'm going to pass it off to John, and he's going to speak for a few minutes on deepening his practice.
Okay, I turned off your air conditioning.
Hey, yeah, thanks for that. That was amazing. Yeah, so I hope everybody had had a great experience in this course. I know I really learned a lot in doing it. There's a lot of things I hadn't seen before, and I think this was a really great course to get a good lay of the land. Like a meditation teacher once sort of told me, like, a good way to go about it is to sort of, and I think Taylor was talking about this, to like see what works for you and then sort of go deeper. There's all these different disciplines and that have sprung up all over the world, and they all sort of go through different methods and methodologies and lineages, and what may work for one person may not work necessarily for another person. So to find what works for you. So I guess for continuing practice, I guess I would have one recommendation. So when you're meditating and you sort of wander away, and then you realize that you've wandered away, and you sort of gently bring your attention back, that's meditating, right? And in your journey, in your practice, there are going to be certain times in life where you might stray from the practice. Things get busy, and you may not even realize it. and maybe it's like weeks since you meditated, or even months or years even, and you may realize, hey, what happened? I was meditating. Well, that moment of realization is part of the practice. So, and you can gently bring yourself back to practicing. So it's the same thing. It's so don't beat yourself up if things get busy and you can't meditate for a while. Just realize that, it's time to gently bring yourself back and keep at it. And the longer you do it, the more it works. And so thank you all for being a community, and for this has been a really great experience, and I hope it was for you too. So I guess, do you want to take questions, Taylor, or?
Yeah, we'll take questions right now. You can go ahead, Noelle.
I don't really have a question so much as wanted to thank all of you for doing all of the work that you have, assembling the program and bringing it to our attention and leading it so adeptly over the last few weeks. There is a lot of familiar faces here and a sense of some community, and so kudos for you folks for creating that from, I think, all over the world from what I can tell here. So good job, and it's been great to be part of it. And I don't really have a question so much as a compliment for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Noelle.
Thanks, Noelle. So Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things is I also want to second the fact that I want to thank everyone for their efforts here and taking us through each week. It's been extremely beneficial to me. It's something that I'm going to go back and find out what works for me and to keep trying. And it's going to be an iterative process. So I really I really appreciate that. Just I have a question actually pertaining to the link between the idea of listening and noticing little things. How do you measure that? Is that something that you measure by journaling? Is that something that what is your approach for measuring noticing the little things? Because that's was something that came up in the videos this week. But I also noticed myself as just listening sometimes. It's a big thing, but it is a little thing at the same time. So is there a way that you measure? Is it just journaling, or is there some other way that you approach measuring that particular, those particular attributes?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So the times that I've actually measured with a journal, the most recent thing I measured in a journal was I can be very indecisive. So I would actually write down, like, I was indecisive on this day about this thing. And then I would write down what my decision ultimately about it was, and how many times I waffled, and the decision I ended up with, and then kind of how I felt about that decision that I made. And really quickly, what I realized was that I was indecisive almost every day, multiple times, and that it was taking up like a lot of time and energy. So I think just the act of kind of like writing that out in whatever way, I don't think there's like some like cookie cutter way, but just like if you're trying to measure or work on something, like writing that down. And then for me, it's just the act of looking back and being like, and seeing the pattern kind of like play out over and over again. And yeah, so that's how I measure when I'm actually writing things down. And in terms of my meditation practice, so it's a good question, and I hope this was what you were asking. But when I'm meditating and I'm observing my sensations, I'm actually not consciously cataloging and like quantifying or qualifying the sensations that I'm having. But that is all kind of like a byproduct of being aware of my sensations every day for, you know, a set amount of time, like formally. And yeah, so it's kind of like the act of sitting, meditating, observing non-judgmentally. What I come away with from that act is then I'm going through my life and kind of like this experience pops up, and then very simply I've experienced that before, and I've responded and reacted in different ways, and now I have an understanding of how that plays out for me, and now I can choose what I want to do. So it's kind of like there's less surprise in my sensations, and I'm kind of disenchanted and don't get as caught up in them because I've experienced them like intimately a lot, like over and over again. So it's just kind of like the cataloging and measuring and actually like the benefits is really like a byproduct of just non-judgmental observation. It's just I categorized it and kind of mapped it out like that because I think it's just in thinking about it for myself and just thinking about it like very simply what the process is. I just think that that is very simple, like a very simple model of like what's going on. Does that answer your question? Okay. So Noelle, why don't you you can go ahead and chime in because it looks like there isn't any other new questions or new people who'd like to ask questions.
Taylor and Jonathan may want to answer this too, but did you try a lot of different meditative techniques before?
Sure. I think you cut out there for a minute, but your question was if I tried different meditation techniques before I landed on Vipassana, which is the one that I practice. And the answer is yes, I did try other things. I also actually practice, I have a yoga practice and I primarily do that for fitness, but that also really works for me because it's physical. It's still like dealing on the body, the level of the body. So that makes sense, I think, the way I've kind of like modeled what works for me. And yeah, before Vipassana, I was going to Dharma Punks, which is it's a group it's like a meditation group in the city. And they actually do a lot of different types of Buddhist meditation. So they'll do some visualizing. There's some mantras. You'll listen to the sounds of the room. There's also a guy who kind of, he like leads it. So he gives a, what's called like a Dharma talk. And a lot of it too is kind of about the neuroscience of meditation. And that worked for me for a little while. But when I kind of like went on the 10-day and was really taught how to meditate, it really changed my practice and kind of sold me on this technique, because what I was doing before was, it's like what you said, I was kind of like dabbling in these different things, in these different meditations. So yeah, so that was kind of my path. And John, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, when I started meditating, I basically started I kind of just sort of self-taught mostly for the first like 4 or 5 years. Like I just kind of did a simple, I think we did the counting breath exercise, and I did that for about 4 or 5 years. And I started out doing 10 minutes and it was very difficult for me to count to 10. But I kept doing it and I would get like sort of like a peaceful feeling after doing it, which I hadn't really gotten otherwise. And so that was sort of the reward I needed to keep doing it. And slowly but surely, I kept doing that a lot. I worked my way up to like half an hour and 45 minutes. And then after about 4 or 5 years of that, and I had gotten benefits just from doing that. So just getting my mind to like focus on something besides thoughts. And after about 4 or 5 years, I sort of realized that there's like, okay, there's other people who have done this a lot more than I have, and maybe I should go seek some teaching. So I went around and I started going to these different meditation schools in the city. I went to Kadampa, I went to Shambhala. I took some classes there. I did a Shambhala meditation retreats. And then last year I did Vipassana, which is like a shorter retreat but more intense, and that's the practice I sort of do now. Yeah, it was basically just trying out different things. I don't think you need a very I don't think you need to be like find a Tibetan Lama to like really get good benefit out of it. And I think that's something like a misconception I might have had. I think you can really get a ton of benefit by simple practice and really just sort of be guided by what works for you. So thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Okay, so last call for any other additional questions or comments from anyone who watched any of the videos and just wanted to share on that. Okay, then we will go into a poem reading by John, followed by a meditation.
All right, so I'm filling in for Izzy today. So this is dedicated to Izzy. She said brought wonderful poems, and she provided this poem, and I'll try to do it justice. It's a poem by someone named Dana Foltz. Breathe in all that is, awareness expanding. To take everything in as if my heart beats, the world into being. From the unnamed vastness beneath the mind, I breathe my way to wholeness and healing. Inhalation, exhalation. Each breath a yes and a letting go, a journey and a coming home. So I have this meditation. It's a visualization meditation, and I think you can get comfortable, in your meditation posture, whichever one works for you. If you're just wandering in today, just sort of sit upright, but relaxed. So I'd like you to close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. Okay. Fill your lungs, hold it for a second, and then just let go. And once you've taken these breaths, these 3 or 4 breaths, just let your breathing return to normal through your nostrils if you can. The breath is unique in that it's controlled by both our conscious and unconscious mind. They both cooperate to keep us breathing throughout our entire life, from birth until death. Now I want you to imagine that you are floating in the middle of a vast, endless sea. As you breathe in and out, the waves lift you up and lower you down. The sound of the hiss of your exhalation is the cresting of the swell as it ebbs and flows. Experience the sensation of this energy for a few moments. On the sea with which you are floating, you are floating at the boundary of your awareness, floating on the surface of your breath, where things either float into your conscious awareness or sink into subconsciousness. Look around you. The sky contains the weather of your mood. What's the weather today? Is it bright and sunny? Is it stormy? Or is it overcast? Below you are the depths of the ocean of your mind, where all the thoughts, sensations, biological processes that keep your body alive reside. The symphony of things that all happen without you ever needing to even think about it. Ideas, dreams, despairs. All these things arise from this place. As you may have already realized, this is no ordinary ocean, but is the ocean of your mind. All the things that you're experiencing, feeling, touching, are being generated by your mind. In this ocean, your thoughts, feelings, and sensations all have a physical manifestation, an objective reality, an existence that you can see, touch, and hear. As you float here on your breath, watching the sky of your mood, sooner or later a thought will arise from the depths and break on the surface of your consciousness. How does this thought manifest? What form does it take? Is it familiar and solidified? Is it bizarre? Is it familiar? Just observe it. Watch it as it rises from the depths and does its thing. Eventually that thought will pass away. Either it will sink back down, or it may even start to dissolve. Continue floating here, letting thoughts arise from the deep and pass away the next 5 minutes until the bell rings, and then slowly open your eyes. You're on mute, Shrikant.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Taylor. It was an amazing presentation. What I want to do now is we've been going through these courses together for 8 weeks, and we are about to start a new, new course. Easy's had to leave early today, so John, Taylor, Easy, and I will be picking. We've got two or three possible choices, all of which look amazingly interesting, and we're going to go ahead and do that. So we'll continue this, but I want to get feedback from you. So instead of going into breakout rooms, what I would like to do is that I would like to go directly to takeaways of saying, what has this been? Because I was listening to Taylor's presentation, and I was thinking, meditation is really about self-care. You're taking care of yourself. You're paying attention to yourself. We get distracted by life. We get distracted by particular tasks. We get distracted by what is going on around us. What we need to pay, we have to pay attention to. And in all of that process, we kind of forget to pay attention to ourselves at the deepest level. So in various forms, meditation is paying attention to your deepest core. And one of the points that Taylor was making, that it is different for everybody. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording. We're going to just kind of openly share what our experience of meditation was. So again, thank you very much, Taylor and John. And we will now go to the takeaway section directly.